There's a lot that can go wrong when you're bending tubes, especially the kind of tubes that you find in bicycle frames. I'm going to talk about the main things that can go wrong. Let's get into it. So here are some various tubes I dug out of my scrap bin. Some of these are years old from different hack job tube benders that I made or that I bought that were just kind of trash. And so they illustrate the different main kinds of most obvious pitfalls. Kinking. This is what happens when the tube isn't supported properly and you go to bend. You know, as you're bending, the outside needs to stretch and the inside almost needs to get pushed tighter together. And so if things aren't set up just right, it'll just kink like this. Now, in this instance, this tube is actually a heat-treated tube, and that's why it kinked. I used this on my actual nice new tube bender, and it's just almost impossible to bend heat-treated tubing, even in the best case of scenarios. You would heat-treat it after you did the bend generally. So when you're bending tubing, don't try to bend heat-treated tubing. It's just not going to work for you. But this illustrates what can happen if you have even kind of a crappy setup and you have tubing that's not heat-treated, is that it wants to crumple in on the inside. So your best defense against this sort of thing is to have really tight-fitting dies that are exactly the shape and the geometry you want, so that there's no space into which the tubing material can crumple and fold. If its circumference at the point of tangency where it's getting bent, if its circumference is fully encapsulated and it's nice and tight against a hard, smooth material, then the whole outside of it is going to want to flow smoothly along the bend. So that's kinking. Rippling. So rippling is the same thing as kinking basically, but it's on a less extreme level. You maybe wouldn't notice it at first. It's something to keep an eye out for as you're bending so that you don't weld those tubes into the frame and then later realize you have some ripples that show through the glossy paint or something. So here you can see I put the bend in this piece of material as though it was a chainstay, and then I dimpled it for tire clearance, hoping that would remove the rippling, but you can still see it, right? It's not a total kink, it's not catastrophic. Structurally, this is probably sound. It just doesn't look very smooth, right? And so on the inside, it's always going to want to buckle a little bit, and the rippling might be subtle or it might be exaggerated. Don't ever let that sneak past your radar and then you weld it into a bike frame or something and you got to deal with it later when it's more visible and more obvious. Clamping artifacts. That's what I like to call this. When you're doing a bend, you need to clamp it tight to the die that you're going to bend it around, and as you're doing the bend, whether there's a roller or whether it's friction based, it just wants to draw the tube around. It wants to pull the tube on the bender, and so you need to clamp it tight, and whatever you clamp it with has the potential, if you do it wrong, if the tube bender is designed poorly, to leave little artifacts from where the clamp mechanism came in. So here, this was sort of like a split tubing block, and you can see that, and if there's a high gloss paint job on here, you would definitely see that. That clamping mechanism creates issues. Now, that was with a clamp block that had a lot of surface area to distribute that pressure over. If you have some simple tube benders use like a little sheet metal finger or something that just kind of, you swing it around and it hooks, and there's really not much surface area there. So as you have higher and higher bend pressures, it's just going to want to bite into your tube and it's going to leave marks. Now, depending on the situation, you might be able to get away by just putting a little piece of cardboard in there or something. That might be enough to smooth it over so that you don't see it, but it's always a consideration is the clamping mechanism going to leave marks on your tube from where it's trying to grip? You know, you can imagine a pipe wrench gets a great grip on the things that it grabs, but it leaves those nasty serrated bite marks. And if you have a larger surface area with like an aluminum or some metal clamp that has just the right geometry, you might get a really good hold without leaving artifacts. And so it's just something you always need to be thinking about. How are you securing that tube from drawing into the bend? Deforming. I don't know what to call this one. It's where the dies and the follow bars and the different components you have of your bender don't particularly fit the diameter of your tubing just right. And so the high points of pressure on the inside and the outside, rather than, you know, distributing over the surface area of the tube, you have pinch points and you can see those. So like right here, this one I think I bent with some tube bender that had sort of like a V profile on either side of the tube rather than a half round shape that fit tight against here. And so there's a pressure point here and there's a pressure point here. And you know, you'll see that when you have this amount of pressure, even though this is steel, it can pick up the texture or the shape. It'll make impressions on the tubing as you're bending it around if you don't have a smooth enough you know, surface that it's bending against. The last main one that I'll talk about is just inconsistency. And so this is similar to some of the other ones that if you're trying to make a bike, whether you're trying to make, you know, 10 or 1,000 or some number of bikes the same, or I think for frame builders in this, you know, custom sense, you're thinking of just trying to at least make every bike symmetrical from right to left. If you're trying to bend a pair of stays or even matched bent top tubes or something, for any pair that's going to be symmetrical, you want to have the bends have the same degree of bend and all that stuff. And so if you have a clamp mechanism that doesn't hold the tube securely enough and it draws in some during the bend, or if you don't have a way to get repeatable degree of bend, you're going to have issues making the bends symmetrical. And so it's hard to see here, but this one, if you know what to look for, you can tell that it was kind of drawing into the bend as it was getting bent around. And when it does that, it's just not very repeatable. It's hard to get two of the same bend, and so that presents huge issues for just, you know, getting symmetry and repeatability in your bicycle frames. And so you might find hack methods to bend the tubes that get the job done for one tube, but God help you trying to get two matched tubes bent together the same way. And these kinds of questions about, you know, what kind of tubing bender do I need? How am I going to go about that? That completely depends at what scale you're at, how many bikes you're going to make, and how perfect they need to be. Because if you're just trying to make a couple bikes and it's for the satisfaction and the joy of making it yourself, teaching yourself things and learning, and you've got time and you don't mind scrapping a couple tubes along the way, if it saves you $1,000 or more over buying a fancy tube bender, then you might be better served to just have some homebrew simple tube bender that allows you to get the job done. I found that when I tried to do shortcut methods for bending tubes, I was not very successful, and I gave up pretty quickly at trying to find those sweet spots within these hack methodologies where you might have some success. I wasn't seeing that much success, and I said, dang it, I want to make good bikes, and I want to do so in a way that I can feel proud of it, and my goal is eventually to make and sell bikes for a living, so I don't know why I would just, you know, struggle with this. I'm gonna you know, modify my tools, or I'm gonna buy the right tools, or I'm gonna make the right tools so that I can do things in a workmanlike fashion. And, you know, I grab my tube bender, I set it up, I do the bends, I put it away, the tubes are done right the first time. That was what I wanted to do. And there's something to be said for, you know, if you get good with these other hacks, and I'm going to make a video on that, you know, packing the tubes with sand and in freezing water and that sort of stuff. Sometimes you get a good result from that. It's all up to, you know, what your needs are and where you're trying to go with this stuff. So this is the tube bender that I developed more recently that I make and that I sell at cobraframes.net. And I don't want this video just to be a sales pitch for this, because this isn't right for everybody. I sell this for $1,500 starting price. Not everybody needs this sophisticated of a bender. Some people are just, you know, in it for the satisfaction of making their own frame. And some people are doing simpler bends that you can more easily get away with, you know, a simple hack bender method, and that's fine. But at the same time, I made this to solve the sort of issues that I was facing with other tube benders. And there are tube benders that you can buy that will do these bends, but I didn't think that any of them solved the problem in exactly the way that I wanted, with a small footprint bender that's capable of bending even main tubes of the bike and not only stays and not only fork blades. This should do it all, and so I'm real proud of it. And yeah, basically just, you know, buy this tube bender and your life will be perfect.